Well, hello there everyone. Back in 2024, I made a boss ranking on a nice little indie game known as Nano Apostle that I praised for its tightly written story, excellent roster of bosses, and, well, just being a very fun time despite being a very short time. And that remained the exact same. I still love this game. However, the original video was based off only a single playthrough of roughly 5 hours of total playtime, and I have since beaten this game multiple times over and put about 40 hours into this game between Steam and the Nintendo Switch port. And I've really wanted to redo that boss ranking because a lot of my opinions have changed, and I also feel like I've gotten a fair bit better at making videos than I did back in 2024, where I was still kind of not very confident in my style and all that stuff. So get comfy for a little bit as we take a look at one of my favorite boss rosters in any video game, once again as we re-rank the bosses of Nano Apostle. Number 7, Molter. Of course, while I don't think there's any true dud in this boss roster, the least enjoyable of the bunch has to be the fight against Molter, at least for me. The battle is far from bad, and I could just as easily see this being some people's favorite boss fight in the game. But it's very different from the other bosses. Molter is the only boss in the game with an armor bar that covers up his health bar. He can regenerate his armor as many times as necessary, but when it's destroyed he'll be stunned for a very long period of time, allowing you to tear into him. So it's kind of like a Metroid Prime boss in that respect, where you have to basically hit the weak or open up the weak point to stun them, then you can finally do damage. The issue is though, nothing about phase 1 of this fight feels quite right. You get the charge attack right before the battle, but you're mostly just going to use it for counter attacks brought on by the parry. Otherwise, the boss loves to cover the arena in spikes, and instead of traditional attacks, he loves to create little earthquakes, which you can parry for some reason, but it just never feels quite right to me. Plus, he loves to cover the arena in oil as a hazard, which can get very annoying. Now once he enters phase 2, he ignites the furnace in his body, and now he can start catching that oil on fire, which is definitely scary looking, but I find this to be one of those bosses where once you reach phase 2, it's very likely you're going to win that attempt because he doesn't gain any new scary attacks to watch out for, and his only new attacks leave him very vulnerable. The boss is all about area denial and hazard management, with the idea of setting up infection stacks in order to do as much burst damage as you can once he's rendered vulnerable. It's far from a bad boss fight, but it's definitely the one I enjoy the least, and his music is a little more than background noise. At least the execution is really brutal though. Number 6, the non-lethal combat model. The non-lethal combat model is your tutorial giver and the only boss in the game that doesn't have a second health bar. Instead, you battle it twice in the game, and I'd say overall he does a good job getting the player used to the controls in a relatively safe environment, then throwing a final test at them to actually beat the tutorial monster. His design is very utilitarian, there's no epic execution for the tutorial, but he does a good job for what he needs to do, complete with attacks that need to be either dodged or parried, as well as his very own desperation move to make the fight stand out. His rematch doesn't add any new attacks, but it can be a cathartic beatdown to unleash all your skills and a nice cooldown after the potentially very difficult boss fight against the Reaper. Number 5, Hunter. If there is one boss on this list that I think my opinion on has soured on, it would unfortunately be the Hunter. Again, far from a bad boss fight, but he's probably the only one I could feel myself starting to get frustrated with after a couple of losses. Now, as the penultimate boss of the game, I'm not surprised that he's hard, but the issue is he's a ranged fighter in a game that's mostly focused around melee combat, and your only ranged attack is limited to 4 shots at the absolute most, and the only way to restore ammo is to hit the enemy up close with your melee attack. Now, as a positive, you can parry his arrows. Kind of. Green arrows can be parried, red arrows cannot. That's fine, but he's got a few of these gotcha attacks that just kind of exist to make you go, ah fuck, when you take damage. The ability to recover his stamina bar to full, lay down traps to lock you in place, and a grab attack that does 43% of your HP, and while it does give the warning beeps, if you're right up next to him, the grab animation begins a few frames before the red warning flash does, so you'll just get snatched and tossed into the air knowing you're about to take a lot of damage. Now, it's not all bad. Despite him being an archer, he's one of the most fun melee combos to parry, especially when he jumps back to fire 2 parryable arrows before continuing, so you not only stagger him, but damage him in the process. Phase 2 is awesome with his camouflage as he looks all cloaked and distorted, but you can just barely make out his outlines. Being able to hack his traps and catch him in them is really cool, and the music is one of the game's more underrated tracks. But he's also the boss with the least information known about him, since we don't really have any data entry focusing on him, when he doesn't give us any advice about him other than he attacks from a distance, and he's kind of just an awkward stopgap between the 2 most pivotal battles in the game. Plus, he has green blood for some reason, and I don't know why when my other bosses in the game bleed red. And as for one last unfortunate negative, he has the lamest execution in the game by far. There's no real impact to anything, it's just like, oh, we slammed him in the ground a couple times. Okay. Number 4, Berserker. Berserker is your first major boss of the game after you've proved you could best the non-lethal combat model. How impressive. Berserker is far and away the most straightforward boss in the game, but he's also kind of meant to be. He's the demo kiosk boss. Ones that look impressive and intimidating to new people, but one you can pick up and beat in just a few minutes and easily intuit what to do. That doesn't make him a bad boss fight though, far from it. He does a great job hammering home the tutorial lessons even further by having full combos that must be parried to raise his stun meter, shockwaves that need to be dodged through, and laser beams that must be dodged through, and as well as having plenty of openings for retaliation and enough health to tell the player that simply whacking away won't be viable. You need to focus on infection stacks and your grappling hook to do burst damage to the boss fights when you can. Phase 2 doesn't really add any new moves for the player to keep track of, instead showing an escalation in tension by adding on to what moves were already there. The arena gets smaller, and instead of 1 laser beam, there's 3. When he goes for an axe retrieval, he now leaves damaging trails along the ground. His energy balls now come in 2 instead of just 1. It's a simple way to increase tension, but it works extremely well. These Berserkers were the pioneer ground troops that slaughtered their enemies in battle with a resilience of a necromorph, meaning tearing their body apart was the only way to be sure they'd stay dead. And the execution at the end really sells how brutal this game is going to get, as well as that entire lore bit, because even after you cut an arm off, he still tries to just choke the crap out of you before he finally gets decapitated. Number 3, Commander. Don't be fooled by the lower placement. I like Commander more than I used to. I love the music in this fight, I love the shield mechanic, I love being able to hack her turrets to turn them against her and stun her. I love that you get the upgrade, which now lets you, use your sword clashes to destroy bullets as well as have extra range to do damage. And the music in this fight is amazing. Plus her telekinetic axes allow her to remain in the fight up close, so she doesn't shut down the second you reach her, and having an upgrade to your health charges is, very nice for your survivability. Phase 2 sees the arena become covered in lasers, as well as her gain new and more dangerous formations, but unlike other bosses in the game, there's points where she'll just stop attacking and just clutch her head in pain, given her having a human face, and given her, overall just looking more human. There's uncomfortable implications about what was done to her, and what likely would have been done to Anita when she got older, since the Pioneer facility was also researching reproduction, but that's a topic for another video. Specifically, my review perspective of this game. Initially, the battle seems random about what she respawns her bits, but if you check the health bar, you'll see that she has a countdown begin once her shields drop. Granted, it hitting 0 doesn't automatically refill the bits as long as you stay aggressive, so that's important to keep in mind. It's a juggling act boss, much like Molter, but one I enjoyed far more than her fiery companion, and her execution, despite not being as graphic, is a lot more uncomfortable in the game due to her still looking human and also shaking in fear when it happens. Number 2, Reaper. And now for probably the biggest turnaround I've had on any boss in this game. I liked the Reaper originally, but I think how stressful the fight seemed to be, largely in part to the build-up, he was a fight I just wanted over and done with. You beat Malter when he's lying on the ground unconscious and her health is beginning to deteriorate, and the data escape you called a safe haven has gone quiet with no friendly faces and no one to talk to. All you know is that the Reaper does more than just physical damage. It's an anti-personnel unit designed specifically to kill human and other bioweapons in the Nano Apostle project, and nothing has stood a chance against it so far. It's actually built up somewhat like the final boss fight of the game. As for the fight itself, it's downright spooky. One thing that takes getting used to is how most of the attacks are parryable. They just don't seem to be that way because they're a different color. But the Reaper is a boss all about making the player panic since his gimmick is the fear gauge. Anita is terrified of this monster, and rightfully so. I mean, just fucking look at him and the Shadow Realm he drags your ass to, and remember, she's like 7 years old at most. He's got area denial, scythe swings, dark orbs, and the ability to trap you in the nightmare dimension, where you have to find his body 3 times and destroy it to stun him before your fear gauge fills up, and he doesn't insta-kill you, but he'll do a crap load of damage. Then you get to phase 2, where I honestly think the battle becomes a little bit easier. The arena expands, giving you more room to work with, and while his attacks grow more aggressive, he also becomes far more predictable because he's getting, fed up with having to try so hard when most of his opponents go down easily, and he'll also stay stunned longer when you parry him or when you stun him. The fight is a super cathartic battle, and while phase 2 is far from free, he's got one of the most fun combos to parry in the game. And after a more complex nightmare dimension, he'll be stunned for a very long time, effectively drawing the boss fight to an end, as all in all, he's just only got basic offense left. It's a fantastic fight. It has this whole pendulum swing from you being in neutral to then being at a big disadvantage to you just suddenly gaining all the advantage. And it's a great moment in the story showing Anita being terrified but still standing up to this awful monster. And while it's definitely the most T for teen execution, the fact that you're able to rip this monster apart and wipe him from existence is quite satisfying. Number 1, Kurazan. However, despite how Reaper may have improved, the sky is still blue and number 1 is still the final boss fight against Kurazan. I used to think Kurazan was the best boss in the game and a great final boss. Now I think he's one of the best video game bosses ever made. I'm talking top 30 overall and top 10 final bosses. This is far and away the longest battle in the game, but you've got everything in the kitchen sink you can throw at him, and phase 1 is honestly very straightforward, lacking any sort of crazy gimmicks up his sleeve, just being a sword duel. He does have some tricks like a counter stance, but once he, ends it, he's briefly vulnerable, or if you're a parry god, you can intentionally trigger the counter, then counter his counter with a counter of your own, and he can lay down trap mines much like Hunter, which you can hack, though they're neither the obtrusive hazard to you nor the free win button against him, as he has the ability to infect, which means he could sap some health from you just as much as you can from him. But the main goal isn't really to beat Kurazan, it's mostly just to get rid of his first health bar so you can stun him long enough to escape the Pioneer facility. And as you ride the elevator out, Kurazan shows back up for round 2, keeping all the same moves from before, but now in a more cramped arena while increasing the intensity of everything. Okay, he does gain one new move in the form of his Judgment Cut, but it has the same startup as his big dash slash did in the first battle. This fight is challenging, but with all your upgrades you can come away with it, especially when the excellent music is backing you up and encouraging you to, win the day. But hold your horses, we're not done. Just when you think you've won, he enters phase 3. Far and away his most aggressive phase, as he's now able to just kind of make up combos on the fly because he can chain from one move in his arsenal to any other move, which makes his overall somewhat modest move pool feel massive when he can kind of do anything and everything with it, and it's just awesome. But also, this last phase isn't as crazy of an uphill battle as it may initially seem, since Kurazan is constantly bleeding out, and this last health bar is considerably smaller than the first two, and is more comparable to, say, the non-lethal combat model. The last part is just the final sprint to push the player to win, and quite honestly, if you can beat phase 2, you're gonna beat phase 3. This boss will force you into a Zen mode, but that's not a bad thing. The final boss kicks ass, his music is great, the story behind him is awesome, and he's the best boss fight in the game by far. It's not even close. Now that's gonna do it for this video. Even 2 years later, I think Nano Apostle is still an excellent game, and you should totally give it a try. I don't plan on going back and remaking every old boss ranking of mine, but this was one of them I really wanted to do because I have a largely different perspective from only one playthrough when the game was new to now about 8 playthroughs of the game, and I just wanted to talk about it because I like this game and, well, I can do that. It's my channel. I can do what I want. Anyways, that's all I've got for this video. If you'd like to see more content of varying quality, consider liking, subscribing, and hyping the video, and I'll see you all next time. Until then, take care.